Hello, I'm Michael Caton, an Australian Story recent alumni. And tonight's story is about something I'm deeply concerned with. It's also set in the town where I lived as a baby, Biloela in central Queensland. Billow is a small town with a big heart, and they've been fighting for the return of a family, originally from Sri Lanka, who were placed in detention 3.5 years ago. With legal challenges against deportation all but exhausted, it's coming down to the wire.
It was an early morning raid. Piria was preparing milk for Tarnika. 20 Border Force officers and Soko guards stormed their house. They were given 15 minutes to pack their belongings. Piria was not even allowed to change the children's clothes.
No allowed the baby in my hand. Everywhere police, but I don't know why come to my house.
I just swooped in and grabbed the hubby and then the wife and took the kids as well away from the wife. They were all separate and thrown in the car and headed off.
People in Biloela were absolutely outraged when Nadez and Priya and the girls were taken, and we just knew we had to throw everything we had at getting them home.
I've lived in a lot of rural towns in Queensland, but Biloela's Biloela, and yeah, you don't muck with Biloela people. And Nadez and Priya, they're Biloela people.
Everybody that I speak to, even if they haven't heard of the name Piria and Nadez, they would have heard about the Tamil family from Biloela. They are the most popular refugee family in Australia.
Nadez and Priya have both always kept a strong sense of optimism that they would go back to Biloela one day, but trying to parent their children in detention, I think the stress has just worn them down over time.
My family no criminal, only refugee.
வந்து அதை அவங்கள்ட்ட தெரியப்படுத்துறது இல்லை. இப்போ அவங்க இப்போ தான் கொஞ்சம் இம்ப்ரூவ்மெண்ட் ஆகி வர்றாங்கன்றக்குள்ள எங்களோட விசா சிச்சுவேஷன் அவங்களுக்கு ஒரு ஹெல்த்தியான சைல்ட், சேஃப் லைஃப்.
I miss you, Bella.
They're still in detention. They're still bound to that house in Perth and they're still at the hands of the government. They will be deported unless something's done.
We've been running on adrenaline for 3.5 years to get the family home.
Bye.
If we can't succeed in this, the reality of what's going to happen to our friends is unthinkable.
Piria and Nadez came to Australia by boat separately. They didn't know each other, but they were both Tamils from Sri Lanka fleeing the war.
In 1983, civil war erupted between the majority Sinhalese population and the ethnic Tamil minority.
A group of Tamil militants, known as Tamil Tigers, tried to create a separate state in the north and east of Sri Lanka.
And it went through a number of phases, marked by human rights abuses on both sides, by massacres, the use of terrorist activities by both sides.
Like many others, Nadez was under pressure to join the Tamil Tigers.
என்ன தூக்கி கொண்டு ஒரு இடத்த கொண்டு போயிட்டு கண்ணையும் கட்டி போட்டுட்டு என்ன போட்டான் என்னன்னு கேட்டால் நீ எல்டிடியில் கண்டிப்பாக சேர வேணும் இல்லையா உன்னை விட மாட்டேன் 16 வயசு.
He was part of the political wing, which meant he was doing propaganda work.
The war officially finished in 2009 when the Sri Lankan army crushed the Tamil Tigers, and we saw a high rate of disappearances of Tamil people. Many allegations of torture, of arbitrary arrest and detention, and so on.
திரும்ப ஆமி என்னை பிடிச்சி கொண்டு போய் ஒரு நம்பர் பிளேட் ஒன்று போட்டு என்னை ஃபோட்டோ எடுத்து ஃபிங்கர் பிரிண்ட் அவுட் எடுத்து எல்லாமே ஏர்போர்ட்டுக்கு எனக்கு அனுப்பினாங்க. இனிமேல் நீ ஒரு நாட்டுக்கும் போக முடியாது.
Sri Lankan police and the armed forces were targeting anybody who had connections to Tamil Tigers, and the only choice he had was to flee the country.
By 2012, the Australian government said the war is over, it's peaceful, there is no longer any problem in Sri Lanka, you can all go home. And the Tamil Tigers were deemed to be a terrorist organisation.
When Nades put in his claim to seek asylum, he did not reveal the entire story, out of fear of authorities.
5 months later, Nades found out that his claim for asylum was rejected, and then whilst he went through the appeals process, he was issued with a temporary bridging visa, and that's when he came up to Biloela in search of work.
Well, Biloela, we've got about 5,500 people. We have the Callide Power Station. We've got a meat works with about 430 people work there, 21 nationalities.
I was running a migrant English program for Tees Meatworks. They found it incredibly difficult to get Australians to work for them, and they had an agreement basically to bring people seeking asylum up to Biloela, and with the proviso that they would give them work.
டைம் எனக்கு பிலோவிலாவில் ஃபர்ஸ்ட் டைம் நான் இன்ட்ரடியூஸ் ஆகினது சிமோன் டீச்சர்னு சொல்லி அவங்க தான் எனக்கு ரிசிமி எல்லாம் அடிக்கிறதுக்கு எல்லா வசதி எல்லாம் ஹெல்ப் பண்ணினவங்க.
Naz did a job that we always found hard to fill, unloading cartons from a freezer, and he probably did it better than anyone else that had ever done it before, or at least as good as the best. Did his job, and you're really the type of employee that you go out of your way to try and find.
At this point, Priya hadn't met Nades yet, but like him, she had experienced the horror of war and had lived through some terrible experiences.
Priya is from eastern Sri Lanka, which is part of the Tamil homeland. In 2000, her fiancé and 5 other men were rounded up by military, the armed forces, and they put ties around them and burned them alive in front of the whole village.
இந்தியாவுக்கு வந்து அதிலிருந்து மீள முடியாமல் நான் அதுக்கு பிறகு மேரேஜ் பண்ணுற லைஃப்பை வந்து திங்க் பண்ணவே இல்லை.
Priya was able to flee Sri Lanka, and she went to a refugee camp in India, and from there she came to Australia by boat in 2013. And then she was granted a temporary bridging visa to be able to stay in Sydney while all of her paperwork was processed. Priya and Nades didn't know each other until members of the Tamil community down in Sydney decided to play matchmaker.
Priya didn't want to have a family after her fiancé was burnt alive. Nades, because of the uncertain future he was facing, he didn't want to start a family either. But the moment they met, they realised that they could build a family that they wanted for a long time.
It's happy memories, my wedding. My life is a very good husband.
Only lucky and the wedding album.
இதுகள் ரெண்டும் இப்போ பெரியாக்களாக இருக்குங்களே.
Married happy, long time now, very short time, happy, my life.
Nades is a very quiet person. He only talk when he have to make a point, and he's very gentleman.
Pepper.
They are really great couple, and Priya was really happy.
From day one, Priya was very friendly with people in Biloela. She was volunteering and cooking for other people as well, and she was very loved.
Old people is very good, charming, very kind. I go outside walking. Everybody come to, hello Priya, hi, how are you, hugging.
Whatever the community had to offer, they embraced and participated in, and the community was accepting of them.
In May 2015, Priya gave birth prematurely to a little girl. The couple named her Kopika.
I was working as the hospital social worker, and they referred Priya to me when Kopika was a baby because she was considered an older mum but had a significant trauma history. The visa process was a constant worry for them.
Every time call in the immigration, very, very hard.
So in early 2016, I was working for Anglicare as a counsellor, and the Department of Immigration asked if I would support them, as that they knew that Nardis was going to be getting a negative result on his application to stay in Australia. They asked me also to have a team of police, have the ambulance outside waiting in case he tried to abscond or hurt himself. When they arrived, it was just like men in black suits and a woman in black suit. The woman read out the denial of application. Then you could just see him, just whole body just shrinking like that. And they said that the government realises that Nardis will probably be arrested on his return to Sri Lanka, however, it will just be for a short time. That's when it's all started to hit me, just how serious this really was.
பிள்ளைகள் எப்படி என்ன நிலைமையில் இருக்க போகிறாங்க ஸ்ரீலங்காவில் போனோன்னே நான் என்ன போன உடனே ஸ்ரீலங்காவில் இருந்து என்ன ஏர்போர்ட்டில் இருந்து என்ன எடுத்துகிட்டு பிடிச்சிருவாங்க என்ற ஒரு நிலைமையில் தான் எனக்கு என்ன செய்கிற ஏது செய்கிறேன்னு தெரியல.
I sat with him. I held his hand while he cried. All that we knew was that he would remain in Biloela until Priya's application had been processed. That's all I knew. Yeah.
Priya was pregnant with the second child, and Kopika and Priya were invited for an interview with the immigration department. She was not accompanied by a legal representative, and she had to convince the case manager that she faced dangers in Sri Lanka.
Priya disclosed to me why she was so terrified to be returned to Sri Lanka. Nardis had made a friend here in Biloela. This gentleman and his family were deported. He was jailed on his return to Sri Lanka. The army contacted the wife of this gentleman, and she was pack raped, gang raped, whatever you want to call it. I don't know if you've seen fear. I looked in her eyes that day. It was pure fear. I'll never forget that. It stays with me forever.
In May 2017, Priya and Kopika's application for refugee status was rejected. Priya actually appealed this on the basis that the interview and translation process was really unfair. And then it was only about 5 weeks after that Danica was born.
From day one, it was always a difficult fight. The courts don't look at whether this family is of protection or not. They don't look at the dangers they face in Sri Lanka. They only look at the process the government has followed.
The reality, though, in our law is it allows for discretion. It's deliberately there to allow a minister to intervene because there can be exceptional cases.
It's very hard to decide. We look at individual cases, but the minister has to look at the principles across the board. how will this case stand up against other cases? If I let this family, why not that one, that one, that one and that one?
The way ministerial intervention works, it doesn't actually set a precedent. This is a power that is non-reviewable, non-delegable, non-compellable. It is truly a God power.
I wrote a letter of support to the then Immigration Minister, Peter Dutton, and so did a lot of other community organisations and community members. And I genuinely thought the government would be able to see that the family should stay here in Biloela.
It's very unusual where a person's bridging visa has expired that the next day you would be detained. But in this case, that's exactly what happened.
So normally Priya called me around 9 o'clock. I didn't get a call and I suspect that something wrong. One of my other friend went to knock. The car was there. The door was left open and like nobody's home.
எங்களை வீட்டு மெல்போர்ன் டிடென்ஷனில் கூட ஹவுஸ் அரெஸ்டில் தான் வச்சுருந்தவங்க உள்ள அப்படியே நெத்திர கொண்டாலும் இவங்க அரமணத்தியாலத்துக்கு வந்து.
For the first 2 days, the family was not allowed to contact the outside world until they signed voluntary deportation documents.
I just couldn't believe that that was the way that we did things in Australia, to be honest. And I wasn't the only one. Everyone who knew the family felt the same. We need to let people know that they're still in Australia.
That's where the fire for the campaign came from.
And that we need to get this family back home.
And we launched the petition, Bring Them Home to Biloela.
We're calling on Peter Dutton, intervene and stop this madness. Let's actually step up and do the right thing here.
Because they are such a conservative town, I think there were some people who agreed with the government's asylum seeker policies and the government's decisions on refugees, but I think the majority of residents really wanted them to come home and supported them.
We weren't trained in any sort of activism or campaigning or anything like that, so we absolutely were flying blind for a lot of it.
I've come here tonight from Biloela in central Queensland. I guess our question tonight is, what more could we do to ensure that Priya, Nardis, Kopika and Thanika return home to Biloela?
Outside of the very complicated legal jargon, this is actually just a story of a man, his wife and their 2 Australian-born daughters and a little country town in central Queensland that wants them back. We fundraise money to start with to put a billboard with a picture of the family in Peter Dutton's electorate, and we have been fundraising to help to pay the legal bills. And as we continued to do that, people all around Australia and the world started to listen up and take notice.
The family remained in detention in Melbourne for almost a year and a half. They ended up with some very serious vitamin D deficiencies from the lack of sunlight and from the lack of fresh produce.
Thanika, though, when those vitamin deficiencies happened, that was during a very pivotal time in the growth of her teeth. And so essentially her teeth came through rotten and decayed, and she had to have 4 of her front teeth removed.
We had to write letters to get the government to give the girls fresh fruit and vegetables.
This is a letter from the Department of Immigration to then Immigration Minister David Coleman, and it says, In the past 6 months, the department has received 170 letters of support to the appellant and her family, involving at least 18 members of Parliament and senators. The remaining MPs have written to you on behalf of their constituents, including the Deputy Prime Minister, the Honourable Michael McCormack MP, the Honourable Tony Abbott, the Honourable Julie Bishop, the Honourable Barnaby Joyce. We had no idea that so many Conservative MPs had been writing to the Immigration Minister on behalf of the family.
Kobi, inja vandiru. Inja vandiru. Kobi, inja vandiru.
In August 2019, I can remember receiving a video call from Priya, and they were surrounded by Serco officers.
Just relax. My baby crying. You have to go and get. Yeah, my baby crying. Why? No, your baby's not crying. She's fine.
They were being deported. So I panicked and started ringing people.
Don't worry.
Somebody worked out that there was a charter flight about to leave Melbourne Airport, so we went to that spot.
Let them stay! Let them stay!
There was about 100 or so people. We could see one big plane sitting there, white, unmarked plane sitting next to a hangar.
அதுக்கு பிறகு இந்த கையை ஒரு சர்க்கோ அப்படியே சுற்றி உடைச்சிட்டாரு. அந்த கையை உடைச்சி விட்டு அந்த கை எனக்கு இப்போவும் எனக்கு அந்த சவு டெண்டல் 5 millimeter.
Priya was dragged onto the plane. We saw the footage of the girls screaming.
My kids very mentally upset. Is very, very, very hard. I'm a 2 kids is mom. I am normal person is mom.
We heard that the charter flight was going directly to Sri Lanka. We knew that we were running out of time. Legal avenues were our only hope at this point.
We've already emailed them, so that's around 8 o'clock. I phoned the barrister who had been working on the case to see if he could assist, and it became clear to us that the youngest child had never had her claims assessed. And so we lodged an application to avoid them being removed. It took about 3 hours, and by the time they'd got to Darwin, we had the injunction and they had to be removed off the plane. And then a decision was made to transfer them to Christmas Island with no other people in the detention centre other than them. It doesn't have a tertiary hospital. It's remote and it's oppressive.
They were placed not in the upgraded facility that so much money's been spent on. They were placed in the workers' camp.
Very dilapidated. Priya fell through the floorboards. They were rotten and she fell through up to her knee.
The girls are now so traumatised. They can't sleep on their own. They need to sleep with their parents.
We do it again?
Kopika was really starting to see she is so different to other kids, and she was asking, why do people always follow us, talking about the guards.
Let them stay! Let them stay!
What began as a small town protest spread to cities around the country on the weekend.
We're still in uncertain territory, but I guess the fight is not over yet.
It's not about the public mood, it's about what is the right decision in Australia's national interests.
The Prime Minister firm that the family will be sent back to Sri Lanka.
My government's policy has not changed.
Mother's Day.
Thank you.
Every now and then, a person, or in this case a family, tugs at heartstrings, and people say, oh, gee, let's make an exception. But, you know, why do you make an exception for them and not another person who's equally as nice? This is the politics of proximity. I'm near this person, so I want to say you should let them stay. The politics of proximity is not the politics of principle.
On Monday, the 24th of May 2021, the youngest child became quite sick with a fever. Her mother was very, very worried about that. So she asked for the child to be seen by a doctor.
7 days after, high temperature, vomiting, all body pain, stomach pain.
She was being dispensed Panadol. She was given an information sheet about colds. And Priya, she knew Tarnika wasn't getting better.
And it just seemed like nobody was really concerned except Priya and Nadez.
அப்போ என்ன செய்கிறீங்க? கடைசியாக 40 வரைக்கும் காய்ச்சல் வந்தது அவருக்கு. 40.6. ரிபுஜியோட பிள்ளைண்ட வடிவாக தானே நீங்கள் இப்படி செய்கிறீங்க? ஒரு ஆஸ்திரேலியன்ட பிள்ளையாக இருந்தால் நீங்கள் இப்படி செய்வீங்களா? உங்களுக்கு ஒரு மனச்சாட்சி இருக்குதான்னு சொல்லி வந்த.
An Australian-born child who spent nearly 2 years in immigration detention on Christmas Island has been medically evacuated to Perth.
15 days from her first symptoms, she's finally diagnosed with pneumonia and a suspected blood infection.
And then just the floodgates opened. The media attention was unlike anything else I've ever seen.
Let them stay! Let them stay!
Let these people back to Billow.
Rallies are popping up everywhere. Gold Coast, Billawilla, Brisbane, Newcastle, randomly organising actions to get this family out.
We can't just sit by and let the Australian government do something like that to a young family.
And that's when we really did start to see people crossing political lines.
Liberal MP Katie Allen declaring this has gone on for too long.
The level of parliamentary support, the level of community support for this family is well beyond anything that I have seen in my 30 years' experience in immigration policy.
So about 5 days after, the good news was that the father and the oldest child were able to be transferred so that the family could all be together to live in community detention in Perth.
So I'm here at Brisbane Airport with Bashini, and we're about to hop on our flight to go over to Perth.
Hello. There's a lot of tears, a lot of emotion to share. I share mine, they share theirs, so it's quite emotional.
I know, it's so hard. Okay, but we are going to get through this, okay? That's why we're here, okay?
I don't like here. And my mind always thinking back to Billow.
First,
We have gone through many legal challenges over the last 3 years. The court processes has only so far helped us get more time.
So we're here today because the High Court is handing down its decision as to whether it's going to grant special leave for Tarnika's case.
The High Court has not agreed to a special leave application, which means that we're now in the hands of the Minister to make a decision.
Yeah, that's it. That's a loss. I know that Nadez and Priya are going to be heartbroken once again. Hi, Priya. How are you?
I'm sad. It's very hard, mate.
Frankly, in my view, and in terms of the policy on ministerial intervention, which I administered for over a decade, this is really an open and shut case. Grant a visa. It would take him 5 seconds.
If the Minister doesn't intervene, then they're likely to be removed.
It's not a straightforward issue that it is safe for Tamils to return to Sri Lanka. There are credible organisations arguing that it is not safe.
The United Nations says the human rights situation in Sri Lanka is still very poor, that Tamils still are victim to persecution by the Sri Lankan government, by members of the military, the police, and so on. The war may be over formally, but the problems which led to the war have not been resolved.
The government's position has been that if you allow one person to stay, it may trigger more boats to come, but there are so many other laws in place that prevent that in any way.
The boat turn-back policy is operated by Australian Border Force in conjunction with the Australian Navy, who patrol the seas between Australia and Indonesia. We know that when turn-back policy is in place, boats don't arrive. It would appear the government has got itself into a corner on this, and having refused to intervene for as long as they have, having spent literally many millions of dollars detaining this family, and having created such a furore in the media on it, to now grant the visa would be a very substantial loss of face for the government.
Well, I think the current government's position is perhaps fairly described as hardline, but I think it has to be. If Australians say, well, we don't want an open door policy, we don't have a big sign up that says everyone who wants to come, come. So we set up rules and we expect the government to implement those rules. If you come here by boat, I understand, you're not going to stay.
If the Biloela family are returned to Sri Lanka, at the very best, they will be arrested when they arrive, they will be investigated, and almost certainly have to go into re-education camps for a period of 2 years. That's the best outcome. Their children will be taken away and put into orphanages because they can't go into the re-education camps, and they will essentially disappear into the system. At worst, and more likely to see, is that the parents will not just face arrest and re-education, but likely torture and potentially disappearance. Their case is a very high-profile one, and they will be regarded very poorly by Sri Lanka's authorities. So we'll lose both the parents and the children who are born in Australia.
We are ready now.
எங்கட பிரியாவும் என் லைஃபும் முடிஞ்சு போயிட்டு இப்போ என் பிள்ளைகள கோபிகா தர்ணிக்காட லைஃப் தான் முக்கியம். ஏனப்பா நாங்கள் இப்படி இருக்கிறோம் அப்படி நாங்கள் இங்கே வந்திருக்கிறோம். நாங்கள் இன்னும் கொஞ்ச காலம்தான், நாங்கள் கண்டிப்பாக விலோவிலா போவோம். போயிட்டு நாங்கள் நீங்கள் நினைக்கிற மாதிரி உயிரே அங்கே தான் இருக்குது, என் உயிரே விலோவிலாவில் தான் இருக்குது.
அவங்களோட மனசில் எனக்கும் என்னோட பிள்ளைகளுக்கும் ஒரு பெரிய இடம் கொடுத்துருக்காங்க. அதுக்கு நான் லைஃப் ஃபுல்லாக அவங்களுக்கு தேங்க்ஸ் பண்ணுறேன். தொடர்ந்தும் எனக்கு அவங்களோட லவ்வையும் சப்போர்ட்டையும் கொடுத்து எனக்கு பிலோவில்லாக்கு அனுப்பி வைப்பாங்கன்னு நான் நம்பிக்கையோடு காத்திருக்கிறேன்.
I'm just proud of the town. You know, the way the women, you know, I don't know how they could go on for 3 years fighting like this. I think they've done a great job.
Good night.
There are a lot of things that are special about Nadez and Priya. They really gave a lot to Biloela. Okay. But I would like to think that people in Biloela would fight for any of their friends, because if you take away the politics from this story and the complicated legal processes...
Okay, good night.
It is just a story really about standing up for your friends and continuing to say their names.